The day Faye signed her name on those divorce papers, she wasn't crying. She thought she would be. She had rehearsed that moment in her head 100 times, imagined herself falling apart, imagined her hands shaking so bad she couldn't hold the pen. But when the moment finally came, her hand was steady, and the only thing she felt was tired. Not the kind of tired that goes away after a good night's sleep. The kind that lives in your bones. She set the pen down on the kitchen table. Their kitchen table, the one she had picked out herself at a second-hand shop on Maple Street, the first year they were married. And she looked out the window at the backyard. The grass needed cutting. It always needed cutting. For 11 years, that had somehow always been her problem too. But that was over now. Let's go back to the beginning. Because the ending only makes sense if you understand what came before it. Faye Calloway was 26 years old when she married Dennis. 26, with a degree in graphic design from Ohio State, a small apartment in Columbus she loved more than she'd ever told anyone, and a life that was just starting to feel like her own. She had a job at a branding agency downtown. She had a best friend named Opal who made her laugh until her stomach hurt. She had plans, real ones, the kind you write down and look at on bad days to remind yourself where you're headed. Dennis came into her life the way a lot of things do. Quietly, and then all at once. He was charming. That word gets used so much it's almost lost its meaning, but with Dennis it was real. He remembered things. He remembered that she took her coffee with oat milk, not regular. He remembered her little sister's name and asked about her. He showed up. That was the thing that got her most. He showed up. After a childhood where the people who were supposed to show up often didn't, that meant everything to Faye. They dated for 2 years. He proposed on a Tuesday, which she always thought was funny. Not a special occasion, just a regular Tuesday evening after dinner at home, and he'd gotten down on one knee right there in the kitchen, still wearing his work shirt. She said yes before he finished the sentence. Her mother, Loretta, cried happy tears at the wedding. Her father, Roy, danced with her and whispered, "I like this one, baby girl." Her little sister, Kezia, wait, no. Her little sister's name was Simone. Simone was 18 and wore a yellow dress and kept saying she was going to give a speech, even though she hadn't been asked to. It was one of the best days of Faye's life. The first year was good. The second year was good. The third year was when things started to shift, so gradually that Faye almost didn't notice. Almost. Dennis got a new position at his company. More responsibility, more travel, longer hours. She understood that, she supported it. When he came home exhausted, she made dinner and didn't complain about eating alone most nights. When he snapped at her over small things, a misplaced phone charger, a wrong turn on the highway, she told herself it was the stress. She made allowances. That's what you do when you love someone. But allowances have a way of stacking up. She found out she was pregnant 2 months after their 4th anniversary. She sat on the bathroom floor for a long time before she came out and told Dennis. He was happy, genuinely, she believed that. He held her and said they were going to be great parents, and she believed that too. What she didn't expect was what happened next. Dennis decided, and she wanted to be clear that it was framed as a mutual decision, though she struggled to remember being truly asked, that it made more sense for Faye to step back from her job. His income was enough. Her salary after daycare costs wouldn't stretch far anyway. The math made sense, he said, and she was tired and pregnant, and the math did make sense, and so she said yes. She put her notice in on a Friday, cleared out her desk on a Monday. Her boss hugged her and said her job would always be here if she wanted to come back. Faye smiled and said thank you and walked out into the October air, and something in her chest felt strange, not grief exactly, more like a door closing she hadn't meant to close yet. Her daughter Nola was born in March, and Faye loved her with a fierceness that surprised even her. She would have walked through fire for that little girl. She still would. But loving your child and losing yourself are not mutually exclusive. Faye learned that the hard way. The years blurred together the way they do when you're deep inside them. Nola started walking, started talking, started preschool. Faye managed the house, managed the schedules, managed everything that needed managing. She did it without complaint, mostly, because she had committed to this life and she was going to honor that commitment. Dennis traveled more. He was home on weekends sometimes. He came home with gifts sometimes, not for her, but for Nola, and she told herself that was fine, that was good. That meant he was a good father. She tried not to think about the distance that had opened up between them, slow and quiet as a tide going out. They had a son 3 years after Nola. They named him Cooper. He had Dennis's eyes and Faye's laugh, and she fell in love all over again. 2 kids, a house in the suburbs, a minivan she had never in a million years imagined herself driving. This was her life. She had chosen it. She kept telling herself she had chosen it. The first time she noticed something was wrong. Really wrong, the kind of wrong that doesn't go away, was at a company dinner Dennis brought her to when Cooper was about 2. She had put on a dress she hadn't worn in years, had done her hair, had felt almost like herself again for a few hours. At dinner there was a woman named Rochelle. A colleague, Dennis said. They worked closely together, he said. Faye watched them. She was good at reading people. It was one of the things she'd been good at her whole life. Noticing what wasn't being said, what wasn't being shown. And what she saw that night was a familiarity between Dennis and Rochelle that had no business being there. Not touching. Nothing so obvious. Just the way they angled toward each other. The way Rochelle laughed at things Dennis said that weren't even funny. The way Dennis never once looked across the table to check if Faye was okay. She didn't say anything on the drive home. She looked out the window at the dark highway and turned everything she'd seen over in her mind, examining it from different angles, trying to find the innocent explanation. She found several. She chose to believe one of them. That choice cost her 3 years. She would look back on those 3 years later and understand them differently, understand that she hadn't been naive exactly. She had been afraid. Afraid of what the truth would mean. Afraid of what she would lose. Afraid of starting over at 34 with 2 kids and a resume with a 7-year gap in it. Fear is a quiet jailer. It doesn't need chains. It just needs you to be tired enough to stay. Things got worse slowly then fast. Dennis came home later and later. He was distracted in a way that had gone past stress into something else. Something almost guilty. He started being irritable about money, which made no sense given what he earned. He criticized things he'd never criticized before. How she'd organized the pantry. How she talked to Nola about homework. How she had let herself go, was the phrase he used once, and it landed on her like a slap. She had given him 7 years. She had given him her career, her independence, the version of herself she had been building before she met him. And he stood in their kitchen one Thursday night and told her she had let herself go. She didn't cry in front of him. She went to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub and pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed until the shaking stopped. Then she washed her face, came back out, and finished making dinner. Cooper found it first. Actually, he was 5 years old and thought he was being helpful. He had gotten into Dennis's jacket pocket looking for gum. He was always looking for gum, and pulled out what he thought was a card and brought it to Faye in the kitchen saying, "Mommy, I found something." It was a receipt. From a restaurant Faye had never been to. For 2 people. On a night Dennis had told her he was working late, she stood at the kitchen counter, holding that receipt for a long time. Then she handed it back to Cooper and told him to go watch his show, and she pulled out her phone, and she started looking. She wasn't even sure what she expected to find. Some part of her was still hoping to find nothing, but the thing about truth is that once you start really looking, it doesn't hide well. She found the texts within an hour. She wasn't proud of how she found them. She had guessed his phone password, which she hadn't known she still remembered. But she found them. Long threads with Rochelle. Months of them. Tender in a way Dennis hadn't been tender with Faye in a very long time. She read enough to know everything she needed to know. She put the phone back exactly where she'd found it. She made dinner. She bathed the kids. She read Nola a bedtime story. Nola's current favorite, the one about the girl who lived in the lighthouse. And she tucked Cooper in and sat in the dark hallway outside their rooms for a while, listening to the sound of her children breathing. And she thought about what she was going to do. She didn't tell anyone right away. Not her mother Loretta, not her best friend Opal. She needed time to think without everyone else's panic and opinions crowding in. She called in a favor with a former colleague who was now a paralegal and asked some questions. She started looking at their finances, really looking, for the first time in years, because Dennis had handled most of it and she had let him, and now she needed to understand exactly where they stood. What she found made her stomach drop. There were accounts she hadn't known about, credit cards in Dennis's name alone that had balances she couldn't explain. She didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough. She understood that she had been kept deliberately in the dark about money that was also hers. She understood that the man she had married, the man she had built a life with, had been managing their shared resources in ways that served mostly himself. She thought about calling him out immediately. She thought about screaming. She thought about packing a bag and leaving that same night. Instead, she made an appointment with a divorce attorney. She didn't tell Dennis. The attorney's name was Holt. A calm woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and a directness that Faye found enormously comforting. She laid out everything, and Holt listened, and at the end she said, "You have more leverage than you think, but we need to move carefully. Faye moved carefully. It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of living alongside Dennis as though everything was normal, which was both the hardest and the strangest thing she had ever done. She made dinners. She attended Nola's school play and sat beside him in the audience and applauded. She helped Cooper with a science project about volcanoes. She slept in the same bed as a man she now looked at and felt nothing but a vast hollow sadness. Some nights she lay awake and thought about the woman she had been at 26. The one with the little apartment and the career and the plans. She didn't blame that woman for the choices she'd made. That woman had loved a man and trusted him and built a life with him in good faith. There was nothing wrong with any of that. The wrong had come from somewhere else. She thought about Nola and Cooper, about what it meant to show them, what it meant to show her daughter, especially, what a woman accepts and what she doesn't, what she settles for, and what she decides she deserves. That thought, maybe more than anything else, was what got her through those 6 weeks. The night she told Dennis, Cooper was at her parents' house. Loretta had taken him and Nola for a weekend. Faye had arranged that deliberately, not wanting the kids anywhere near what was about to happen. She cooked dinner anyway, out of habit. The table was set. The food sat there, untouched. She put the documents on the table between them. Dennis stared at them. He looked up at her. His first response was not guilt. His first response was anger. Where is this coming from?" he said. "What are you doing?" And she told him, calmly, not screaming, not crying. She had done all of that in private when it couldn't be used against her. She told him what she knew. About Rachel, about the accounts, about all of it. She watched his face move through several things. Anger, calculation, something almost like fear. And she felt strangely, nothing. He said he could explain. She told him she didn't need him to. He said they could go to counseling. She told him that ship had sailed. He said she would regret this. He said she couldn't afford to do this. He said she had no idea what she was walking away from. She picked up her purse, walked out to her car, and sat in the driveway for a few minutes just breathing. It was a warm night. The neighborhood was quiet. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at nothing. She drove to her parents' house. Her mother opened the door and took one look at her face and said, "Oh, baby." And that was when Faye finally cried. Standing in Loretta's hallway with her mother's arms around her, Nola asleep down the hall, and Cooper curled up on the couch with a cartoon still playing. She cried for a long time, and then she stopped, because she had things to do. The divorce was not easy. Dennis was not cooperative in the way he had promised himself he would be, when he was still trying to talk her out of it. He disputed things. He delayed things. He said things to mutual friends that made their way back to Faye, through people who thought they were doing her a favor by telling her. It took 8 months. She moved in with her parents during that time, just temporarily, which at 36 felt like a kind of defeat and then, slowly started to feel like something else. She was in the house she'd grown up in. Her father Roy brought her coffee in the mornings without being asked. Her mother watched Nola and Cooper in the evenings so Faye could take a class. She'd enrolled in a refresher course for digital design, updating her skills for a field that had changed considerably in the 7 years she'd been gone. Her hands remembered more than she'd expected them to. Opal came over every Thursday with takeout from the Thai place on Birch, and they ate on the floor of Faye's childhood bedroom and talked until midnight. About everything. About Dennis, about the marriage, about the years Faye had given over to something that turned out not to deserve them, but also about other things, plans, possibilities, what Faye wanted her life to look like now that she was building it herself. What she found, slowly and then more clearly, was that she wasn't just rebuilding. She was building something she'd never actually had. A version of herself that she'd earned, not inherited or borrowed. She got a job at a small creative studio 6 months after the divorce was finalized. Not the salary she'd had before, not yet. But real work. Work that was hers. She sat at a desk with her name on a nameplate and opened a design program and started creating something. And for the first time in a long time, that feeling of the closing door started to feel like it might open again. Nola was 9 by then. She was sharp and funny, and occasionally exhausting in the way 9-year-olds are, and she had started asking questions that Faye answered as honestly as she could. Why did you and Dad stop living together? Because sometimes grown-ups make a choice to live apart, and that can be the right choice, even when it's hard. Do you still love him? Faye thought about that one. I love who I thought he was, she said, and that's okay to love, but it's also okay to love yourself enough to leave. Nola thought about that for a second. Then she said, okay, and went back to her homework. Kids are more resilient than we fear and more perceptive than we realize. Faye thought about that a lot in those months. Cooper adjusted in his own way. At 6, He was mostly concerned with whether the dog they'd always talked about getting was still a possibility now that his parents lived in different houses. Faye told him yes when the time was right. Cooper told her the time was right now. She laughed for the first time in a week. She got an apartment the following spring. Second floor of a building near a park with a window in the kitchen that let in morning light. It wasn't big, it was exactly enough. She set up Cooper's superhero comforter on the bed in his room and hung Nola's drawings on the refrigerator with magnets she bought at the farmer's market down the street, and she stood in her small, quiet living room on the first evening she was there alone, kids at Dennis's for the weekend, and felt the particular weight of a life that was finally entirely her own. She called Opal. Opal said, "How does it feel?" Faye looked around at the bare walls she hadn't decorated yet, the boxes still stacked in the corner, the single lamp throwing soft light across the floor. "Honest," she said. "It feels honest." The letter from Rochelle came about a year later. Faye almost didn't open it, didn't recognize the name at first, saw the handwriting and thought it might be something for the previous tenant. But then she recognized it. She opened it standing at the kitchen counter. It was handwritten, 3 pages. Faye read it twice. Rochelle wrote that she wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wrote that she had ended things with Dennis 8 months prior. After discovering he had been lying to her in the same ways, he had apparently been lying to Faye. That he had told Rochelle his marriage had been over for years. That Faye knew that they had an understanding. Rochelle wrote that she had believed him, that she had felt sick when she understood the full truth, that she didn't expect Faye to believe any of that, but she needed to say it. Faye folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. She sat down at her kitchen table. Her table now, the one she'd chosen herself, and she thought about it for a long time. She didn't feel vindicated. She didn't feel triumphant. What she felt was something more complicated than that. A kind of sadness for all 3 of them, for the different ways they had each been deceived by the same man. And something else underneath that. A quiet, bedrock certainty that she had gotten out, that she had made the right call, that her kids were going to be okay, that she was going to be okay. She put the letter in a drawer. She never responded to it. She didn't need to. A year and a half after that, Opal got married in a small ceremony in her backyard, and Faye stood up there beside her as maid of honor and gave a speech that made half the guests cry and the other half laugh. Nola was a junior bridesmaid and took the job extremely seriously. Cooper ate 4 pieces of cake and felt fine about that. Standing in Opal's backyard with a glass of champagne, watching the people she loved move around in the warm evening light, Faye thought about the woman she'd been, the day she walked out of her apartment on the morning she married Dennis. Young and hopeful and a little nervous, with no idea of what was coming. She wouldn't warn that woman. What would she say? Don't marry him? Don't have Nola and Cooper? Don't give those years? Those years had also been her life. Parts of them had been genuinely beautiful. Nola's first laugh, Cooper's first steps. Tuesday evenings when Dennis would come home and they'd watch a movie, and she'd feel, for a little while, like everything was exactly what it was supposed to be. You can grieve something that also hurts you. Both things can be true. What Faye knew now, standing in that backyard, was this: that she had been the kind of woman who kept giving past the point where she was being met. And she had learned, not easily, not without cost, that the answer wasn't to stop giving. The answer was to know what you deserved in return, to hold that knowledge steady inside yourself, even when it was inconvenient, even when you were scared, even when the math of staying seemed to make more sense than the math of leaving. She took a sip of champagne. Nola appeared at her elbow, a little breathless, wanting to know if she could have more cake. Faye looked at her daughter, this girl she had built her whole life around for 9 years, this sharp, funny, occasionally exhausting person who was going to grow up and make her own choices and her own mistakes, and God willing, find her own way through. She wanted her daughter to see this, a woman who had started over, a woman who had been afraid and had done it anyway, a woman who had chosen herself without stopping loving the people she was choosing alongside herself. You can have one more piece, Faye said. Nola grinned and disappeared back into the crowd. The evening went warm and long and slow. Opal danced with her husband until they both looked ridiculous, and neither of them cared. Cooper fell asleep on 2 pushed-together chairs. Roy and Loretta sat side by side near the edge of the patio, her father's hand on her mother's knee. Faye watched all of it. She had carried so much for so long. She had bent herself into so many shapes trying to make things work. She had mistaken endurance for love and called it devotion. She had been so afraid of the cost of leaving that she had nearly paid a higher cost to stay. But she was here now, on the other side of all of it, and the evening was warm, and her people were around her, and her life, messy and unfinished, and hers, stretched out ahead of her like something worth moving toward. She set her glass down on the table. She stepped out onto the grass. She danced.